Number 7 is a bit more involved, so watch carefully. The first thing is that I'm going to show you how to get some of these things on Excel, what you do. So to do this problem, to find the answer, you can find the answer pretty much on Excel. So how do you do this? Well, in Excel, in the column A, you would put a value, and that value that you want to put has to be close to where the limit is. In this case, t goes to 0, so I'm going to put a number that's to the left of 0, but close to 0. I put in the number -1. Notice that I cannot just plug in t equals 0 right here, because I will get a 0 in the denominator, and I can't evaluate this. So to find the behavior right at t equals 0, I cannot do that by just plugging in. So I'm just going to numerically see this by plugging in a number like -1 and seeing what happens. To get the y value at t equals -1, what you do is you type in this expression. Notice I have 9 divided by the quantity a2 times square root of 1 plus a2. That's exactly this thing right here, except instead of t, I have a2. And that's what you do. You put your formula into cell B2, but you replace your x values with A2. Make sure you have parentheses. Notice that I have parentheses here, and I also have parentheses around the entire fraction, so I don't accidentally add something that I'm not supposed to add together. And I did the same for the 9 divided by A2. So that's the biggest mistake when someone's entering things in. They make a mistake with the parentheses. Notice I also changed the x value to -0.99. That's because as soon as I plugged in -1, I realized that I had an error because that makes the 0 in the denominator. So I took something close to 1, which is -0.99. Next step is I'm going to start making the x's bigger, and you do that by taking the previous value, which is a2, and then adding 0.1. I intend to scroll this down at some point, so when I do it with a2, what it will do when I scroll this box down one more step is that it's going to automatically do a3 plus 0.01. So now I don't have to one by one plug in x values. The same goes for the y values. If I want to get the y value for -0.98, I don't have to retype in my equation. I can just highlight that first box. My mouse will become a thin cross if I bring it down to the right lower corner. You should see the same thing if you bring your mouse to the right lower corner of this first box, highlight it, and then drag down. So I showed you the drag down, and it automatically finds the y value for that x value. Now if I highlight these two cells and then drag down, I get the columns of x's and y's, and I can go as far as I want. So I went further than 0, but just to the right of 0, like so. So I took it down, you can't see the whole thing. Now I'm going to graph so I can see what the behavior is right around 0. And so what I did is I clicked scatter on chart tools, insert chart, and I click scatter, which will plot the points for me. So when I click scatter, I get this graph, no frills, it doesn't have axes or anything. You can do that. I always do that out of habit, but this time I didn't. And what I will see is if I've highlighted these two columns before I hit insert chart, like go back here, notice that these two columns are highlighted before I went and clicked scatter. That tells the graph to make the this the x column and this the y column, and just plot the points. And so there I have the graph. Now I can see what the behavior is right around 0. I can't look at right at 0 because that's not doable, but I can see that something funky is going on right at 0. But I just put my mouse right around here, and I get the x and y coordinate, and you see that the y coordinate is around -0.41713, so I know my answer is going to be around -4.71. Well, how do I actually find the exact answer, which is what Webassign wants you to do? Well, I can't plug in t equals 0, like I mentioned earlier, because if I plug in t equals 0, I get division by 0. So my goal is to algebraically transform this guy, which I already know has a limit. If it didn't level off or something weird happened at t equals 0, and you would see the weirdness, it would look very funky. It doesn't have a limit. This one does because everything looked fine and I could actually see the limit. The first step is to combine fractions. And by the way, the step of combining fractions here in number 7 is the same thing you will do in number 6, which I'm not doing. This is a harder one. So step 1 is to take this piece and this piece and look at the denominators and see what I have to put in this denominator so that I can make these two denominators the same. Well, this side's missing a square root of 1 plus t, so I'm going to put it there. If I put it on bottom, I have to put it on top, and that's how I get a common denominator. And then I combine. Nothing comes together. I just put the two together on top in the numerator. I can't combine any like terms because there are none. So there's where I am now. This is which is really this. I factored out the 9. And now I'm going to do something very strange. When you were young, you used to try to get the square roots out of the basement. But this time, I'm going to get the square root out of the top, because the purpose is to get something to cancel so that I can plug 0 in. So I have a purpose. How do I know to do this? Because I've done a million of them and I've seen the trick before. So this is called rationalizing the numerator. You've rationalized the denominator. We're going to rationalize the numerator. So the numerator has this piece, the 1 minus square root of 1 plus t. I'm going to multiply that by its conjugate, which is 1 plus the mess, instead of 1 minus the mess times 1 plus the mess. If I do that, I can FOIL it, but there's a reason why I'm doing that. It turns out that this is the difference of squares. It's a minus b times a plus b, with a equal to 1 and b equal to square root of 1 plus t. That we know is a squared minus b squared. A squared is 1, and b squared is 1 plus t, because all squaring this term does is it removes the hat. Don't forget the parentheses, because if you do, what happens is you would have done all that work for nothing, and you will end up with something not canceling out. In this case, notice everything cancels and I get minus t. How do you know you did everything right? It should look a little simpler looking at the end of this. So I left that scratch work down here just to remind you I have this minus t. This was my original fraction. My 9 factored out. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the conjugate of this piece right here. I haven't changed anything because I'm multiplying by 1. From my work on the previous slide, I know that these two pieces here are minus t. Don't forget the parentheses. And now I can cancel those two things, and I get minus 9 over the square root of 1 plus t times 1 plus the square root of 1 plus t. Now I can plug in t equals 0. So step 3 is to let t equal 0, which is really taking my limit, and I get minus 9 halves. That's the exact answer. Well, minus 9 halves is actually minus 4.5, which is all pretty close to minus 4.7. So I'm pretty confident this is the correct answer. So now I'm going to pause this one because that was a very long problem, and I'll go to the last view.